how's your heart today? Leaving home is rarely one clean moment. It happens in pieces: a drawer emptied, a final dinner, a charger packed at the last minute, a suitcase waiting by the wall, while everyone acts more normal than they feel. Tonight is for the words we carried right up to the door and still couldn't say. These letters are for family, friendship, and quiet love, the people and feelings that stay behind even when we keep moving forward. If you've ever left a place before your heart knew how to leave it too, maybe this will feel close. I never told you that I was more scared than excited the morning I left. For months, I had been the one talking about moving away. I wanted a bigger city, my own routines, a life that felt like mine. I said it so often that everyone assumed I was ready. I made lists. I compared rent prices. I answered practical questions, like practicality was the whole story. The week before I left, the house seemed to become louder in tiny ways. I noticed the scrape in the hallway floor, where we had dragged the old cabinet years ago. I noticed how the bathroom door clicked once before it fully shut. I noticed my mother rinsing vegetables with the same rhythm she had always used, and my father clearing his throat before saying something practical. The night before the train, we had dinner like it was any other evening. My mother made soup because she always made soup before anyone traveled. My father asked if I had printed my ticket even though it was already saved on my phone. My younger brother asked whether I was taking the old headphones because he wanted them if I wasn't. Everyone stayed inside practical sentences, so did I. But under the table, my hands were pressed together so tightly that my knuckles hurt. I wanted to say, "Thank you for making this house easy to return to even when I acted impatient to leave." I wanted to say, "Please don't confuse my restlessness with not loving this place." I wanted to say, "I am excited, but I am also scared." Instead, I asked for more soup, which in my family has always been one of the ways love keeps going when language gives up. The next morning, my mother was already awake when I came downstairs. She was in the kitchen packing food I had specifically told her not to prepare. On the counter sat a small bag with peeled fruit, a rice ball wrapped too carefully, and the crackers I always reached for when I was nervous but pretending not to be. She handed it to me and said, "Station food is expensive." My father carried my suitcase to the car, even though I had lifted it twice already for no reason except pride. He checked the trunk once, then again. He asked if I had enough cash, whether the lock on the new apartment had been changed, and whether I knew which street to avoid after dark. For years I thought instructions were a colder shape of love. I understand now they were simply the shape his fear took when it wanted to keep me safe. On the drive to the station, I hated how tender everything looked. The bakery sign, the traffic light near my old school, the corner store where we used to buy drinks after dinner in summer. Nothing was disappearing, yet everything was already becoming back home. At the platform, time sped up in the cruel practical way it always does. Bags down, ticket out, track number checked again. My mother smoothing the front of my shirt, though there was nothing wrong with it. My father reminding me to message when I arrived. My brother standing slightly back, pretending boredom because tenderness embarrassed him. I hugged them all, but not long enough. When I reached my apartment that evening, the room looked like everything I had wanted: quiet, mine, full of possibility. I put down my bags and stood in the middle of the floor waiting for excitement to arrive. Instead, the silence stared back at me, in a way no silence at home ever had. At home, silence was always full of someone. A television in another room, a cupboard closing, footsteps in the hall. Here, silence was only silence. I opened the food bag because it gave my hands something to do. Under the crackers was a folded napkin with one line in my mother's hurried handwriting. "Heat the soup before bed." That was all. No speech. No dramatic message. Just heat the soup before bed. Yet that small instruction undid me completely, because it carried the whole emotional grammar of home inside it. Rest. Eat. Don't let yourself go cold. Be cared for, even if I have to teach you how to do it without me here. What I never said before leaving was that I wasn't trying to escape any of you. I was only trying to become myself, and I didn't yet know that a person can want distance and still ache for what made that distance survivable. I never said that part of my courage had been built by a house where someone noticed if I sounded hungry, tired, or too quiet. I never said that on the first night away. What I missed most was the sound of being known without needing to explain. Home did not end when I left. It simply changed from a place into a voice I could still hear in practical sentences. The next letter is for the friend who belonged to my hometown so completely that I didn't understand I was leaving part of myself with them too. I never told you that I started missing our friendship before the bus had even left town. We had known each other so long that closeness felt ordinary. You were not an event in my life. You were one of the ways life made sense. Your house was the one I could walk to without checking the weather. Your family knew how I took my tea. You knew which version of my silence meant to bring food instead of questions, and I knew which joke would make you laugh even on a bad day. Everyone talked to me about the move in adult terms. Rent, safety, commute, opportunity. Those things mattered, of course. But almost nobody asked what it would mean to leave behind the person who knew my face in every season. The person who had seen me loud, awkward, hopeful, unreasonable, tired, and still stayed. The person who made the town feel like more than geography. We kept acting normal. We still got cheap coffee from the same place with the same chipped cups. We still sat outside the convenience store when the air was cool enough to make staying out feel thoughtful instead of lazy. We still complained about the same local people with the same half-affectionate cruelty. If someone had watched us, they would not have guessed that goodbye was already building itself between the lines. A week before I left, you asked whether I was excited. I said yes too quickly, and you laughed in that way that told me you had heard the part I skipped. Then you said, "You'll probably come back speaking faster and acting like our coffee is beneath you." But the truth was that I was afraid of something more specific than change. I was afraid of watching our friendship become scheduled. Afraid of becoming one of those people who says, "We should definitely catch up soon," and means it sincerely while still letting months pass. Not because anyone stopped caring. Because adulthood rearranges access long before it rearranges affection. The night before I left, you came over with snacks for the trip and a keychain from the terrible little bookstore downtown. It was shaped like the old water tower. You tossed it on the bed and said, "So you don't become unbearable and sophisticated." Then you looked around my half-packed room and said, "We've been here a long time." That sentence has stayed with me longer than anything prettier might have. Because it held everything at once. We had been in that town a long time. In that friendship a long time. In that version of ourselves a long time. You were naming an ending without making it dramatic. I should have told you then that your friendship had been one of the reasons I felt strong enough to leave. I should have said that being known so thoroughly by another person gave me a kind of emotional backbone. It made the world feel less hostile. It made me trust that even if I changed, some version of me had once been received so naturally that I might be received again. Instead, I said, "I'll be back all the time." It was simply a sentence built out of hope instead of understanding. The first months after I moved, we did what people always do. Photos, updates, late replies with real warmth. Then your job changed. My schedule changed. A visit got postponed, then another. Nothing dramatic happened, which somehow made the loss harder to recognize. We were still friends, we still cared. But the daily version of us, the one that had existed almost accidentally for years, could not survive the new geography on memory alone. Still, even now, there are moments when the town returns to me through your voice. A certain sunset, over a grocery store parking lot. The sound of two people laughing on a low wall outside a shop. The sight of someone carrying hot drinks with both hands in winter. You remain stitched into my sense of origin, and I don't think that will ever fully change. What I never told you is that I missed you before I even had the right to call it missing. I never said that leaving town felt smaller only because I knew you had once made it feel large enough to dream inside. I never said that some part of my idea of friendship still answers to the standard of being understood as quickly and casually as you understood me. The last thing I should have said was simple. I was not leaving you on purpose. I was leaving the life that had room for us every day. Sometimes the people we leave behind are also the people who taught us how to feel less alone inside ourselves. The last letter is for the quiet love I never named, because departure made honesty feel heavier than silence. I never told you that every time you asked, "So when do you go?" It sounded like two questions at once. We were never officially anything. That sentence makes the story sound lighter than it lived inside me. You were just there, then more there, then suddenly built into the last season of my town in a way I still can't fully explain without sounding sentimental. We had known each other casually for years. Then, just before I left, we began running into each other everywhere. The bakery near the station, the bookstore with the broken bell, the weekend market where neither of us ever bought much but both of us liked wandering slowly among other people. Some feelings do not announce themselves. They grow through timing and repetition until one day you notice that a person has quietly become part of the architecture of your week. You started walking me home after coffee, even when your route was different. I started saving small stories from the day because I assumed I might see you later. You remembered details I had forgotten saying. I noticed the weather more because it changed what kind of evening we might end up having. Nothing about it was loud enough to force a label. That was the trouble and the beauty of it. Once, after I joked about not knowing how to cook for myself once I moved, you appeared at my door with a handwritten list called Meals That Won't Ruin Your Week and 3 little spice jars with labels in your terrible handwriting. You said no one should begin adulthood with bland eggs and unnecessary suffering. I laughed because laughter was how I kept tenderness from becoming too visible too quickly. But I kept that list. I still have it. At the time, I told myself I was only emotional because I was leaving. That maybe everything familiar was glowing brighter because departure was near. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. You had become the person I wanted at the edge of my day. The one I measured the weather against. The one I was quietly saving my softer self for. A few days before I left, we sat on the steps behind the library because every cafe in town was crowded and neither of us seemed ready to let the evening end too early. You asked if I was ready to go. I said, I think so. Then you said, you don't have to be fully ready for something to still be right. That sentence traveled with me for years. I wanted to say, part of me wants to stay, just because staying would mean I still get to be near you. I wanted to say, you arrived at the exact wrong time, and somehow that still feels beautiful. I wanted to say, I don't know what this is, but I know it matters enough that leaving feels less clean because of you. Instead, I asked whether you thought I would hate the city after winter. Silence felt kinder, or at least safer. People talk about honesty as if it is always the noblest choice. But timing is part of honesty too. I was leaving. You were staying. I could not ask you to hold a confession that I myself could not give a future to. Maybe that was wisdom. Maybe it was fear. Most real things are both. At the station, you came with coffee in a paper cup, and that calm expression you always wore when you were trying not to make something harder than it already was. You handed it to me and said, message me when the city disappoints you. I'll remind you it was your idea. I laughed because that line gave us a way to keep the whole goodbye from becoming too true too quickly. Then we hugged. It was a brief hug, careful. The kind that becomes longer in memory than it lasted in life. On the train, I kept holding the empty cup long after the coffee was gone because throwing it away felt too final. We stayed in touch for a while. Warm messages. Occasional updates. Small kindnesses sent across distance. Then less. Then rarely. No heartbreak. No betrayal. Just the ordinary truth that some feelings belong to a season more than to a future. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. The season mattered. That is enough. What I never told you is that you made leaving softer. You turned my last months at home into something gentler than fear. You taught me that not every meaningful love is measured by whether it gets to stay, only by whether it helped us become more honest with ourselves while it was there. I never said that. On some level, I loved you. Not in the demanding way that asks to be chosen against reality. In the quieter way that simply recognizes itself, bows to timing, and remains grateful it existed at all. If these letters found you tonight, maybe it's because leaving home is never only about distance. It's also about the people we couldn't fully carry with us, the versions of ourselves that ended at the door, and the truths that arrived too late for the room we were in. Even so, those unsaid things still matter. They shape how we remember, how we love, and how we understand what made us brave enough to go. If this stayed with you, carry it gently. Some words are late not because they were weak, but because the heart needed time to understand what it had already lost and what it would always keep. Stay soft.